Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Property and Investor Podcast. I am, of course, your host, Paul Lanfear, and this is the podcast where I speak to some of the most interesting, inspiring, and importantly, resilient people in property investing and beyond. And in terms of the theme of resilience, I don't think I could speak to a better guest than this. My guest on this occasion is Nicole Bremner. Nicole, a very warm welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. And I must say, you have to be resilient to be in property.
You definitely do. You definitely do. And I'm not sure I realized that when I set off down this journey, exactly that would be probably the core skill that I think other people would need. We could probably get into that in a moment. So if we were to go to LinkedIn, we would find that Nicole is a startup investor, a real estate investor, a non-exec director on an advisory board. But I think if we look further afield, we'll also notice that she's an adventurer, a sailor, a wife, a mother, and no doubt a seriously busy human being. So Nicole, thank you very much for doing this. I appreciate your time. It's very precious. So Nicole, you've got quite the story. So I'm going to shut up and I'm going to let you tell us this story. So tell us how you got into property and then take us through what's been going on over the last few years in this great adventure of yours.
Sure. Where do we start? Well, let's go back to 2000. And I was living in Australia. I just met my partner, my now ex-husband, actually, but my partner at the time. And we'd only been together a couple of months. And he said, "Do you want to move to Europe with me?" And I went, "Yay." And I was 21, turning 22 at the time. So I was young. I had these ambitions of becoming a financial advisor, what we now call as a wealth manager or an IFA. And so I had started my undergrad in Bachelor of Commerce Financial Planning. And I had also started my postgrad, which was a Diploma of Financial Planning, which in Australia is a postgrad. So I'd started them, but I hadn't finished them. And I was also working full time. So my partner said to me, "Let's go to Europe." Packed up, and by December 2020 we were living in London. So it was really interesting because I arrived and I expected just to walk into financial advisory and get a paraplanning role, and the whole environment at that time was completely different. It hadn't professionalized. That came later in the mid 2000s, and it really wasn't an industry that I was interested in or wanted to work in. So I worked in banking. And so I worked in funds management and a couple of different places, worked for Bank of America, which was then bought out by JP Morgan. And then I worked for, Bank One, which was bought out by Bank of America, JP Morgan, sorry. And then I worked for Credit Angestand, which was bought out by Bank Austria. So it was a time of all this consolidation and also a time when the dot-com bubble burst. So it was really an interesting time to be in the city. Then moved to New York, and this is now 2007. Had my first child, and when he was about 7 months old, I went back to work at Goldman Sachs, and I was on a return ship, and it was a program. It was the first of its kind, actually. They were trailblazers. I see that there are return ships everywhere now. A lot of the institutions offer them, but it was for mainly women who had been out of the workplace for a period of time and wanted to get back. And I thought it was going to be full of mothers, but actually it wasn't. It was people who'd taken career breaks to go traveling or look after ill parents, all sorts of things. So yeah, I was one of the few mothers there. So it was a really interesting time because my very first day of work, the 15th of September 2008, was the day that Lehman Brothers crashed. So I sat there thinking, I am never going to get a contract with Goldman Sachs, as I watched just all the red, and all the horrible images of people carrying their boxes out, and the lives were lost. People took their lives at that time. It really was a difficult time. So my partner just said, "Right, we've got to leave. Let's go." So by February 2009, we were back in London. We actually arrived back on Valentine's Day, and I found out I was pregnant with our second child. So it was at that point that I thought, I can't go back into banking. It's not going to work for me. And I started looking at what to do. And I looked at everything. Cupcakes were a big thing at that time. Food blogging was massive. So I did all of that. I did photography. I did all sorts of things. I taught knitting and crocheting in New York. So I thought, yay, I can do this for people. And my goodness, there's just no money in it whatsoever. So it was just a time of trial and error. But at the same time, in 2009, we found this derelict vicarage in Hackney, East London. And I slowly started renovating that, and I worked with this young builder who hadn't really done that much before. He was quite inexperienced. I was inexperienced. So together, we kind of just got on and renovated this beautiful vicarage. So I loved that project, that whole process and that project, but I didn't realize that you could actually have a career in property. And it was, I guess, watching TV shows and realizing that there's this whole industry out there where people actually make money renovating properties. And I thought, wow. And I started talking to my partner about it, and he said, why don't you do it? You've loved this process. You've done a good job of it. The valuation's increased. You're still talking to your builders. This is good. Why don't you go and do it again? So I started becoming meticulously interested and organized and analytical about every property price in the area. I set up spreadsheets, I tracked it all, and I knew exactly what the price per square foot was of every property that had either sold or gone under offer or was for sale in the area. I built up a huge amount of local knowledge, found another property, and I didn't even realize I could get finance. At the time, I thought you just had to put cash in, and that's how this worked. So one thing I've been very open about, because a lot of people will say, well, life was good for you. You started with a lot of money. And yes, I did. I started, while my background was very humble as one of 4 children with 2 parents who were nurses and then a single mother, my partner and I managed to build up quite a large investment. Mm-hmm. And also we sold a flat in Clerkenwell that we bought for 400. We sold that for 800. So mm-hmm. that gave me a really nice pot of money to start with. So I did start with 1.1 million pounds. Mm-hmm. Which is more than what most people have to start with, I admit. So I found a property, renovated it, sold it for 1.85, and ended up making over 500,000 net of all fees and things. So that was really interesting, because that was the first commercial project that I'd done outside our homes. And I thought, wow, there's something in this. And I started talking to friends about it, and friends were going, we want to get involved. And I was really lucky, because at that time, Hackney was going crazy, and Hackney was the best performing borough in the whole of the UK over that period of time. And I think what happened is I rode that wave and became very lucky with my timing. Mm-hmm. And I probably internalized that as skill. And I'll be the first to say that all traders, all people who do this have the same problem. They get lucky. Yeah. They are in the right place at the right time. They think, yay, I'm so skillful. And yeah. I must say I did that. And so, yeah, there you go. That's how I got into property.
I absolutely love it. Liz, my beloved wife, we had successfully refinanced the project, got 100% of the money out of the project. And I remember celebrating with Liz, and who's my absolutely fantastic wife and business partner. And after the celebrations had died down, she did say to me something along the lines of, Paul, just so you know, everybody looks like a genius in a rising market.
Exactly.
Thanks very much. Thanks for the reality. Yeah, much appreciated. Feel free not to give me those, Liz. Anyway, okay. Well, I mean, that's enormously candid of you, and shows enormous self-awareness. Just out of interest, what was the time frame that we're talking about here? What were those kind of dates that you were seeing Hackney on the rise and you emerging into this space?
Yeah, so that was around 2011, 12. And so I really rode that wave from 2011, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Oh, yeah. And then it just stopped. But what was interesting is you could see signs that it was stopping. So I did a number of properties across Hackney. I really was buying, renovating, and selling so many properties. And every single time the profit margin came down and down and down. And it was really interesting. In around 2015, mm-hmm. you could buy unrenovated properties for more than renovated properties, because everyone wanted to renovate a property. And I just thought, okay, this is not worth it. I'd be better off buying homes that were renovated, trashing them, putting boards up, and then selling them, and I'd get more money for them. So that was a bit of I stopped buying in 2016. That was my last project, was early 2016, but I'd already exchanged on it years before, so I had to complete that purchase.
Well, interestingly, there isn't a guy who I don't think so active now for various reasons. One of his strategies was actually to get auction properties and to board them up and make them look distressed in order to achieve a higher sale price. I mean, it's just absolutely crackers, isn't it? It's interesting to see the progression of Hackney. So I started living and working in London in like 1998 until like the early sort of 2000s. And we used to, at my firm's football matches used to take place on Hackney marshes. And I remember, like, you know, back in the early 2000s, like Hackney wasn't a place where you would anticipate huge capital growth. It was like a reasonably exciting place to go to at that point in the early 2000s. But obviously by 2012, it was obviously becoming gentrified and having that kind of head of steam, which you capitalized on.
Definitely. And it really was that time frame. I think I've got to get the statistic right, but it increased over 2 decades by 900%.
I mean,
that's how crazy it went. And the first time that we went into Hackney, actually, we just went, oh my goodness, what are we doing here? Let's get out. It was really quite frightening. And then an agent, we were looking at renting when we came back from New York, and we knew the Islington area and loved it. And a very clever agent said, I've had a really good home come on the market. Let me drive you. And so because they drove us, we didn't quite know where we were going. And of course, they showed us this amazing house, and we went, oh my goodness, this is so much better than anything we've seen in Islington, without realizing that we were in Hackney proper. But anyway, it was a lovely place, and I'm really glad that we rented there, because it then allowed us to find this vicarage around the road that we were then able to renovate, and are currently selling it actually right at this moment. It's under offer. So yeah, it's an interesting place, and it's gone through, it's had a lot of challenges. And I think there were riots there when the London riots happened. They were in Hackney as well as in Notting Hill, which is another really mixed area. If you think about that Ladbroke Grove area, we have got that in Hackney, in London, where there are very mixed neighborhoods, and Hackney is one of those that still remains very mixed.
So pick up the story for us then. So where do we go from there? Because what you're very well known for is your crowdfunding work. Obviously, you know, you're published, you entered into like partnerships and all the rest of it. So where does the rest of the story take us?
Oh, we could just skip all of that if you like.
Okay, fine. We'll just
yeah, they're all happily ever after. We'll just go to there. But no, so what happened is, after the success of my first 4 or 5 projects, I started meeting people in the property industry, and I like to call them the Facebook bubble, because it's not the real property industry. It's not the estate agents generally. It's a really weird social media industry, or property industry, I think. But I started meeting these people, and I found this whole world out there of property meetups every month and all of these things. And I thought, oh, this is exciting. I can meet people, because I was also working on your own with a group of lovely builders is fun, but it was quite lonely. I was after interaction with people, and especially other women. And so it was through these networks that I met other women in property that were at various stages of their career. And it was a really lovely time, actually. And as I got to know people and told them what I was doing, people were obviously really curious, because I started with a lot of money, and it just, money talks, doesn't it? And people were curious as to what I was doing. So I was invited to speak at more and more events. And what I found is, after the events, people were coming up to me saying, how do I get involved? How do I invest? And having been FCA regulated, and my partner was FCA regulated, we just said, we're not taking any investment. We'll take one or two investors into a single project, but we won't do any more than that. And they have to be large investors and we have to know them. So we invested in that way on a few things. Mm-hmm. But I was really worried about the implications of running an unregulated collective investment scheme. Mm-hmm. So that's when my broker introduced me to simple crowdfunding. Mm-hmm. And it then gave me a way of giving people the opportunity to invest in these projects. And I think for me, I genuinely felt passionate about giving people with as little as £500 the opportunity to invest in these developments that were generally only available to larger developers. Mm-hmm. And I felt really passionate about it. And I really felt like I was, it gave me such purpose. I felt like I was doing the right thing. And it just felt so good to be able to educate people on property and to have these people being able to invest in these. So that was all going well. And we did another one and then another one. And in the end, we did 6 over the course of 2015 through to 16. So it was a really rapid rise. And at one point, we had properties with a GDV of over 125 million. And that's a figure that's often bandied about where I say that I'm worth that much. I've never been worth that much. I had a share of properties that were worth 125 million, as did many other people who invested in them. And unfortunately, by 2016, when we purchased the last of the properties, things had started to go wrong. And while I won't go into too much detail because there are ongoing legal issues, just timings were slipping, things were just not looking right. People were starting to ask questions. I was starting to ask questions and wondering why things were the way they were. So, but I still couldn't find anything concrete. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until 2018 that I found some issues. And that's at that point in time, I knew there was something wrong. So we had 169 investors with as little as £500 through to, we had a couple of investors who put in a shared amount of 1 million. So we've got a huge range. I think the average investment size was around 15,000. So mm-hmm. We're talking about a lot of investors. Mm-hmm. So I sent out an email and said, I've uncovered some issues. I'm really concerned. I have a solution. Let's work together. Expecting that everyone would go, yay, Nicole, that's fantastic. Let's do it. Instead, everyone's just, whoa, we don't want anything to do with this. This is too frightening. And I felt really wronged because I thought that people would just say, yeah, we can see what you've put forward is a serious breach. We're now going to work with you to resolve this. And that wasn't the case. Shareholders were scared. And I can now see in hindsight that I can now see in hindsight the problem with my approach, I guess, having analyzed it to death. I should have acted in a different way. I should have perhaps just found a solution initially rather than just say, right, let's work together for a solution. I should have just done it. Mm-hmm. So it was an interesting process over the course of 2018, 19, and even into 2020 of trying to convince people that, I guess, who to believe and who to side with. So it was, as all of these things were unraveling, it was a really, really difficult process because I'd gone from having all of these friends and all of these people in property who were my property sisters forever and all of these things. I had a team of amazing women that worked with me, through to everyone just going, oh, we don't want anything to do with you for fear of contagion. Sorry, just coughing. Sorry. Yeah, so it was a really difficult time, and it really I'm not getting teary from the emotion, by the way. I'm getting teary from the coughing.
Okay. But either is fine, by the way. Either is fine. You have permission to express your emotions.
I've dealt with the emotions now, Paul. Yeah, so it was a really difficult time, and no one's actually lost money yet, have they? I think maybe on one project people have lost money, and that's 1 out of 6. On the other 5, no one's actually lost any money yet. they're all still in play. And that's what I try. Whenever people contact me, I try and say, well, actually, only one project out of the 6 people have definitely lost money. The other one, there is still hope, and I'm still hopeful. So yeah, that's sort of how things started to unravel, and it's been a really long process this last 5 years of trying to work through numerous investors, 6.43 million, plus a couple of larger individual investors, plus all my money that I invested. I'm still the biggest loser in all of this. And yeah, a divorce as well. And while I don't want any sympathy, these are things that happened, and these things that all happened over that last 5 years.
And so obviously there's been challenges. There's no doubt there's been challenges, and no doubt listening to you, it's clear that there's mistakes have been made, and challenges have arisen, and there's been consequences, not least obviously being divorced, losing capital, and everything that's happened to investors as well. I suppose if we circle back to the starting principle, though, what you were trying to do was trying to find a legitimate way to raise finance from more than one investor in a way that was FCA compliant. And this is a subject which I find like genuinely really, really interesting, because my wife Liz and I, we at an early stage, probably around that time as well, we invested enormous sums in property education. And then one of the challenges is then, with my former lawyer life, I would then sit down with my lawyers, my accountant, and my mortgage broker and say, okay, guys, listen up, this is what we're doing, and this is how we're doing it. And they'd all look at me with absolute horror. I said, what do you mean we can't do it that way? And they would each take their turn to tell me how what I had learnt, in inverted commas, 2 days before was just not going to work if I wanted to be compliant. And I have this concept which everybody who's ever worked for me has heard me tell them, which is cocktails on the beach. Cocktails on the beach, which is when we're all retired, we all want to be enjoying our cocktails on the beach, and when none of us want to be looking over the shoulder wondering about what we did. And that's my advice to everybody who's ever worked for me, is cocktails on the beach, people. Cocktails on the beach. Like, let's just make sure we do this right, so we never ever have to worry about anything. But one of the, you mentioned it explicitly, one of the meetings that I had, of, invited to a really lovely law firm in Leeds, hosted by the partner I used to work with. Fantastic biscuits, fantastic coffee, which is obviously the defining characteristic of a good law firm. For him to bring in one of his colleagues, nice guy, but it's one of those meetings and my heart literally went through the floor. And I remember getting the lift with Liz afterwards and going down the lift and saying to her, do you think that was the worst meeting we've ever had in our lives? And she said, yes, I think it probably is. Because this guy just said, look, who's ever presented this to you, what they're effectively trying to get you to do is to do an unregulated collective investment scheme. You will never be able to comply with the legislation that's required for a collective investment scheme. So you need to stop and you need to give up now. So our antidote to that, which is much less sophisticated than yours, was for each project, we would only have one investor. They'd have to be 100% in to bring the cash. And obviously we'd then leverage it with our cash. And we kept it nice and simple like that. And we'd only ever go to the banks at the end of the process, when we're all done and dusted. But I always have to say, had an eye of envy to your approach, because I could see that what you were very successfully doing was you were getting the crowd fully informed of what you were doing, and they were following you, and with your 50,000 subscribers and followers, and then you were at least attempting to, I appreciate your acknowledgement of stakes with me, but attempting to then, in a compliant way, get the platform to do the execution. So it was like an execution only operation for them. You'd done all the graft. As somebody, an uninformed observer at a distance, that to me looked quite elegant. I thought, well, that's quite smart, isn't it? It's like you you do the work with the community, you take them to the platform does all of the FCA compliance. Everybody is as protected as they can be, bearing in mind that presumably all of these investors were equity investors, not secure debt investors.
Exactly.
So I appreciate it's not panned out the way that you anticipated, but I think the concept of it is worth articulating, because actually I think the idea of it is worth exploration.
Yeah, no, exactly.
I don't know how you feel about that now. I mean, I suppose, is it like, do you wish you'd never raised a penny of external finance and just done it all yourself?
Yes, every day. Yeah, I do. I really do. And yeah, there are lots of regrets, I think, and lots of things that I wish that we'd done differently. But as you say, the concepts sound. The only thing is that the FCA has now shut down virtually every single provider of that service, bar about 2.
Right.
So that, to me, indicates that the FCA are not happy with this, and they were not happy with the way things were panning out. And so they took the regulation into up a notch, and it just meant that none of these platforms were compliant anymore. So there is one player still out there, Simple Crowdfunding. And so they're still, I have no affiliation with them whatsoever. I'm sure they wouldn't even like me saying their name, but they're still out there and they're still operating. So I guess that's testament to the fact that they are still compliant and the FCA is still happy with the way that they're operating. Okay. But yeah, it's an elegant solution. And I think in a rising market, it has its place. And the other thing is that there needs to be more structure and compliance around the developer. And there needs to be more accountability around the developer, I think, than what was there previously. And I think that now the crowdfunding platform is much more aware of that, and they probably have put those controls in place. So I'm not sure, because I'm just so out of touch with that industry now. But I'm sure that these controls are in place. They needed to be.
And I suppose just to offer like the complete, the complete picture, so that people can kind of, if they've got their own thoughts and they want to do their own further kind of investigation of this area, they can. The methodology would be, you have interested parties, you take them to a compliant platform, they become shareholders, they take equity, which means obviously their capital is at risk, in big red letters.
Yes.
And then there's the opportunity then also to take on external debt to effectively leverage the equity. Okay.
Yes, exactly. And when I first started with Simple Crowdfunding, I was bringing 100% of my investors.
Mm-hmm.
And then as we moved on the projects, I was bringing maybe 20, 30, 40, 50% of the investors, and they were bringing the rest. And that was from marketing efforts. They were able to raise awareness and people were coming in off from them. So while it helps to have your own investor base, you don't necessarily have to have your own investor base.
Mm-hmm. Very good. I feel like I need to repeat the disclosure at the beginning of the podcast, which obviously this is not financial, legal, or health advice. Please do your own due diligence. And we've already heard Nicole say, that there's a certain sentiment that perhaps she wishes she'd only used her own money. And do you know what? The number of investors that I know now who are around, particularly when the Brexit leave vote announcement was made, I remember where I was. I was getting out of a tent at Glastonbury, and I remember my friend saying to me, "Oh, we're leaving the EU." I said, "Are you having a laugh?" And I'm not making that as a political point. It's just I was amazed that was the result. And who knows? Maybe it was the right. I don't know. But the point is, for a lot of the investors in the space, particularly in London, that date seems to be the date when there was a real change. It suddenly became much more difficult to roll over debt. Sentiment in the market changed. Investors went from developers to basically having to almost buy up their own stock if they could, what by hook or by crook. It's just, would you agree with that? That was
absolutely. there was a triple whammy in 2016. We had the Brexit vote. We then had the Section 21. I'm showing my ignorance now, but the
tax
changes.
relief one. Yeah.
Yes, exactly, where you could no longer claim the full tax relief on the profits. Then we had the stamp duty increase on second homes, the penalty. So these three things happened, and it completely took the air out of the market. Foreign buyers were no longer interested, and so we lost the first round of foreign buyers. And I don't think that the luxury market in London has ever recovered from 2016. If you look at the numbers, it's still below. So it really did take everything out of the luxury market, and then that just rippled down throughout the market in London. So 2016 was everything changed then, and I don't think it's ever come back. We had a little blip, of course, with COVID, with the stamp duty relief, and then also with the additional assistance for help to first-time buyers. And everyone was at home improving their homes because we were in lockdown, and all of a sudden there was this huge demand for property, and everyone just listed their property, and we had these spikes in sales and prices and things. And that was fantastic for us, because all of these properties that we'd been sitting on forever, a scheme of 49 flats in Luton, for example, we were able just to sell into this quite buoyant market. So that was good. But still, the London market, I don't think has recovered since that time.
Interestingly, another sort of person who was a developer around that time, they said that what also didn't help in the aftermath was then the emergence of crypto. And his sentiments are that crypto sucked the life out of kind of the retail investment market, and everybody was like piling into that and not rolling over their loans to developers. But I'll leave that as an aside.
I've got a different theory on that.
Oh, have you? Oh, let's hear the different theory. Go for it.
There are a lot of property developers that jump on bandwagons and become evangelical about whatever it is that they are investing in. It's kind of like, I don't know, Amway and Herbalife and all these things that people get involved in. Property was one of those. It was almost a pyramid scheme, if you like. And then all these people started losing money or not making their money back in property. It was all about serviced accommodation and HMOs and all of these things, and people rushed into them and were evangelical, stopped making money. And then it was the next thing was crypto.
Right.
And so all these same people rushed over to the crypto market, jumped in, and were evangelical about crypto and making all this money, they say, off crypto. And then that crashed, and they all jumped into NFTs. And so here they are on NFTs being all evangelical, going, this is the next thing, and we've got a membership club, but it's all NFTs. And you couldn't really understand what they were doing, but it was all NFTs, so you couldn't really ask any questions because it was just so cool. And so my theory is that there's always going to be a group of people who just follow the next bandwagon, and who knows what that next thing is going to be. I don't think we're seeing anything evolve at the moment, but it could be back in property. There's some interesting statistics coming out about property right now that are making me, for the very first time, which I'm probably jumping ahead a bit here, Paul, so sorry, but I'm looking at property again going, maybe it's time to re-enter that market. But
okay, well,
or maybe I'm a reverse bellwether, I don't know.
no, you've seeded that very well. We will get to that. So I think there's probably a topic that we'll deal with in this. If my emotional intelligence is anywhere on this, I suspect that we're going to deal with this in one sentence. Okay, so I saw you do a great video years and years ago. I think probably at the end of doing KPI with Daniel Priestley. Daniel Priestley obviously has his, he needs no further, he doesn't need me to talk him up or flog his books for him, let's be honest. But one of the elements in KPI is to form partnerships, isn't it?
Yeah.
And as I said, we're going to deal with this in one sentence, Nicole, because I can see your face.
One word?
So, one word on partnerships, Nicole.
Don't do it. That's two. Yeah, no, I was asked this question recently, and they said, "What's your advice for anyone going into property?" And I said, "Trust no one." And these two young girls, they're in their late 20s, early 30s, they just went, "Oh." And I said, "Well, it's true. Sign the prenup, sign a cohabitation agreement, sign a contract, sign whatever it is that you need to do, but you must have that document signed. Don't just trust the handshake, as horrible as it is. Do not trust it." And the thing is that having contracts in place is the only way that you can clearly set out the expectations and the repercussions of each of those decisions to each of those parties. So when it says, when you ask partnerships, I think, will I ever go into partnership again with anyone? Possibly, possibly. Not in property, never in property. That I'm just so burned by that. But possibly in other areas. But I will make sure that I have such an ironclad contract with that particular person that nothing can get in the way of that, and that if things should start to unravel, then I've got that contract. I can hand it straight over to yourself as a
definitely not to me.
Lawyer, one of your colleagues.
Let's be really clear about that, Nicole. You're
not practicing now,
no,
but
no.
yeah, one of your former colleagues, and say, right, here you go. Here's the contract. This has now happened. Deal with it. Perfect. So that's my take on partnerships. Probably never again in property.
I think that's a really good take. And when I talk to people kind of in my little group, you know, that's the thing that I always say, and I say it with a smile on my face. I say, look, most of these things don't work out, so just know that, just know they don't work out. So if you want to get into bed with somebody, that's fine, but just know it's probably not going to work out. And the most important thing is, just as you've rightly articulated, is the contract. And I can tell you this as well, unfortunately, no matter how good your contract is, it won't deal with every eventuality, unfortunately, and therefore you're then in the hands of the lawyers. I love my lawyer brothers and sisters, but you know, they're expensive, you know. And there's also a conflict of interest. I know this is an unpopular thing to say, but there's a conflict of interests. You know, if you approach a lawyer at £500 an hour and you ask them to solve their problem, how motivated are they to fix that problem in the first 20 minutes? Probably not very much. And I know they've got all kinds of ethical duties, but also we're human beings as well. So I think these are wise words. You know, I believe no one, trust no one. Good advice in life, I think.
I think there's one other thing to add to that, Paul, and that is that the person that you're pursuing has to have something in order for you to pursue. So it's all fine having the moral high ground and saying, look, I'm right, and I've got a contract which says that you've breached this contract. But if the person that you're going after has nothing of value that you can recover from them in order to make your position whole, there's no point even wasting the legal fees in chasing them. So that's the other thing, is just to be sure that whoever you are partnering with has something that they can lose if things go wrong, which sounds really mercenary and horrible, and I hate even saying it, but that's, I guess, what happens as you go down this process and have experienced what I've experienced. You realize that you almost have to take this slightly cynical view, and you can't be naive, Nicole, forever.
No, I think also you can turn that on its head, though, which is, you know, you can leverage what you have as well, though. So, you know, I try and put a positive spin on this. You know, like if you're reasonably new to property, but you know, you have assets, you have an established reputation in another industry, you know, people who are who I know who are very credible, you know, they're a little bit anxious about, well, you know, I don't know if people want to work with me. It's like, well, you know, you've got a net 7-figure net worth, like there's a lot, even though you don't necessarily have the experience, you have a lot that you can offer them. And just from a purely Machiavellian investor legal mind, it's like, well, you've got assets, okay, so they are going to want to work with you because there's something going on there. Fantastic. Right, let's move on to the here and now, and perhaps happier ground. So where are we now?
Well, where are we? That's very interesting. So I am on the property front, continuing to wind down positions. So gone from around 110 units down to, I think there are about 20, 21 units still that are either in construction or being rented out. So for me, the last few years has just been trying to consolidate and stabilize what I've got. As I said earlier, there are still ongoing legal issues, so that's taking up a lot of my time. But I guess I went through a huge identity crisis, and without wanting to get too psychological or emotional, it was really difficult losing these so-called friends and colleagues and people who I really cared about within the property industry. That was really painful, and so I've had to go through this whole process of who am I and what's my purpose in life. And that's really difficult when you believed so strongly in a purpose and it was to help people invest in property developments. And then that gets just smashed to smithereens and you're again looking for a purpose, but I guess harking back to an era of the good old days. So yeah, it's been a process. And where I've got to is that I do love helping people, and I genuinely love people, and I want to do something that is helping them. And when I thought about my very first passion, I guess, which was financial advisory, and then what I was doing with the property, it was almost financial advisory, but not giving advice. It was just, hey, this is what I'm doing. If you want to be part of it, here's a regulated way of doing that. And then when I just listened to various stories of women who had either been through divorce or been through a really tough time financially. And let's just say they were on their own for the very first time and having to make decisions on their own about their finances. They were petrified. And it remains such a big decision for women as to what to do with their money and how to invest it. And especially if they've been in a relationship for 20 years and all of a sudden they're on their own, they've received this divorce settlement, and it's just, oh my goodness, this money now needs to last me the rest of my life. And they almost feel just petrified by that weight of responsibility that they find on their shoulders now. So it just got me thinking about, okay, what can I do now? And it's led me down a few paths. I was accepted into a master's of psychology, and then I decided to defer that for a while. And it's led me right back to financial advisory and dusting off my qualifications and seeing what I can do in that regard. So I've enrolled in my regulatory exams because my Australian qualifications mean nothing. And then the UK qualifications that I did were in 2003, 4 and 5. So they've all expired. So I've got to start right back at the beginning. So it's quite a loose plan at the moment because I'm getting on with my studies and I'm seeing what happens. But I think that I do bring this empathy and this wealth of experience and knowledge that comes along with having done the wrong thing and suffered the consequences, and now doing the right thing as far as having a balanced portfolio and investing in the right way and having the right risk outlook, all of those things. So I think that's something that people will find valuable. So I'm working on that. Also, looking a lot more at the angel investing side. So I was very fortunate to make three very good I made 3 investments in 2018-19, 2 of which have been fantastic. One is no longer with us, but that's angel investing. The 2 that are going really well, one's Bamboo Auctions, which is an online auction site for property. It's going from strength to strength, and it's led by a fantastic management team. And the other one is Terrible, which started off as a music merchandise company and is now a platform for bands that tour. And again, fantastic management team there. And I do back people, and I backed both of these companies because of people, and they're doing really well. So hopefully one day there's a really strong exit for everyone involved in those. And I'm looking at another couple of startups at the moment that I'm nearly ready to invest in, just doing the last sort of tire kicking on those. But that's a really interesting thing because, again, it's working with people. It's people who see not just my money that is potentially useful for them, but also my experience. And especially when things have gone wrong. And I now know exactly what not to do when things go wrong, how not to communicate with investors, and how not to have contracts and various things in place. And that's valuable. And it took me a long time to realize that that is actually valuable for companies. And yeah, so that's really what I'm doing a couple of voluntary things as well in and around Rochester, where I live. So I'm a governor now on a school board, and I'm also part of the Rochester City Centre Forum, helping the shop owners in the area to raise money for Christmas lights and things like that. I'm a treasurer for them. So these are lovely things just to get involved in my local area and help me get out of quite a dark time that was very difficult to get through. And I feel like I've come through that now and out the other side and have some exciting things to look forward to.
Very good. So, I mean, it's fascinating what you say about, perhaps leaning back into that financial advisor guidance role, predominantly for women. I was really shocked a couple of years ago where one of my best friends lost his dad, and I was in his kitchen. I was speaking to his wife, and I said to his wife, "What have you been doing all day then?" And she goes, "Do you know what I've been doing? I've been setting up a spreadsheet of all the financial stuff of your friend's mum." And her partner, her husband of many years, like 50, 60, how many years it was, had very unfortunately died. And it was almost like there was a blank piece of paper. She didn't know how to set up a standing order. She didn't know how direct debits worked, because her role in the family was she was the carer of the family. She looked after the boys, she looked after the house, and that was her role. And she didn't have visibility of the finances of their family. And so my friend's wife, who was like an incredible woman in her own right as well, her first job was like, right, I'm going to have to help you set up a household financial system. So, using bereavement as just one example, there's clearly like a massive need for it, isn't it? There's clearly a massive need for it. And I suppose as the father of a daughter, I obviously have I have a horse in this race, in that I think, every woman on the planet should be financially independent, regardless of their circumstances, all the way from cradle to grave.
Exactly.
Because, but I would say that, wouldn't I? So as well, it's interesting. The terrible merch thing, I think, is absolutely brilliant. So I had a quick look at their thing. I mean, that in itself is just really catchy, isn't it? Seeing the word terrible merch makes you double take and click, because it's just so interesting, isn't it? I think one of the things I have a sense of as well is that your podcast has pulled you through this darkness. Do you want to talk a little bit about your podcast?
Yeah, so I've run a podcast since 2017, and it was quite novel at the time, and there weren't many podcasts, and it used to get thousands and thousands of downloads a week. It really was fantastic, and I never directly monetized it, but it would provide opportunities. So I became a non-executive chair actually at Cogress, which is an alternative fintech company, which is no longer with us. And that was off the back of my podcast. I had lots of other opportunities that all came off the back of my podcast, but not directly monetized. I never even thought about monetizing it back then, because it was something that I enjoyed doing. I did it in a studio, and actually I had invested in that studio as well. And unfortunately, the producer there passed away of COVID, despite being a COVID denier in early 2000s. So that was a really difficult time for him and his family, and for those of us who'd invested in that as well. So I didn't have the studio anymore, and COVID hit, and I thought, I have to keep this going. And I had some really good coaching with this lovely lady who contacted me and said, I think you need coaching. I can offer you coaching for free if you're happy to do it. And I went, yeah, sure, great. So she coached me throughout the first COVID lockdown. And it really was just this way of connecting with people, and not just with my guests, but with other people. And even if it was just a few hundred people downloading each episode, I felt like I was connecting with someone, because almost overnight, my social media went dead. My emails went dead. Everyone stopped calling. And I thought, I still want this connection with people. And my podcast has allowed me to do that. And so I've been very sporadic with it. I'm really not great at keeping up with it. And I guess there's no real need for me to keep up with it because it doesn't do anything except make me feel good. And I hope that it informs people, and especially my property prices podcast that I do with Ido every month. They're really, I think they're really interesting. I get a lot from recording them, and I love the way that he's so positive and I'm so negative, and we can balance each other out. So yeah, that's been it's just been something that I'm so glad that I've had, and it's brought up so many opportunities to speak to great people. So yeah, the podcast has been instrumental in keeping me resilient. And I've got some interesting things that I'm working on with some other podcasters as well that I guess is a watch this space. But I think the podcast space is growing. And if you look at women listenership compared to men, women are behind. So there's quite a growth opportunity for women listening to podcasts. So yeah, I'm quite excited by it. Still enthused by my podcast, even if I'm a bit lackadaisical about the production.
Well, look, if it makes you feel better, I think that's got to be a good thing, hasn't it? So
Yeah.
I've got one on time because I can see that I've got to let you go in a few minutes' time. So we'll do a few quick fire ones. I think at one point you held a record, which was the largest sum of money raised on a property platform in the shortest period of time. Go on, give us that soundbite then. So how much did you raise?
Yeah.
And what was the time scale?
I'm trying to remember. This is terrible. This is going back to 2015 or 16. So I think we raised 1.4 million in 18 minutes or something. We were then beaten in time by Lafina Diamantis, and she ended up doing something in about 7 minutes, but it was less. But I still hold the record for the most raised in crowdfunding in the UK, which is 6.43 million. So no one, I think Martin Skinner, when he was around and raising money, I think he managed to get up to 4 million, but I've beaten that now.
Wow, congratulations. Again, really So I would normally, I'm going to hijack a question, unfortunately, for my reasons of absolute self-interest. So normally I'd say, tell us a life lesson. So I'm going to hijack this question. What advice would you give to a teenage girl in respect of social media, given everything you now know?
Oh my goodness. This is something that I talk a lot about because my youngest, I've got 2 boys and a girl, and my daughter's 12 going on 16. I think it is, don't pay the beauty tax. As women, we all pay a beauty tax that men don't pay, and we buy into the beauty ideas. We get our hair done, we get our nails done, we get the Botox, not in your teens, obviously, but when you're older, and we pay a beauty tax. Whereas I see the young boys who, the people that they follow on social media are probably health influencers and trading influencers and things like that. And so they put away money every month and they invest, and they are so much better and better educated with money because of the people they follow. Whereas the women, it's clothing, it's beauty, and all of these cost money. They don't save money. And this is something that I'd just love to say to girls. And I'm talking to some companies at the moment about how you can gamify saving money for young girls, especially, so that they're not caught up in this whole beauty tax that we have driven down our screens at us through social media.
That's so interesting. And that full disclosure, I'm not embarrassed to admit, that's the first time I've heard the expression beauty tax. That's really interesting. Really interesting.
How old's your daughter?
So she's 16.
Okay, so you know all about this then.
Yeah, I do. I'm pleased with how she is approaching it. She's a very smart, balanced young woman. But I think I totally see that there is a very different approach aimed at men and women. you know, if I was being really harsh about it, it's like, oh, it's interesting how companies are exploiting men and women differently. Um, you know, and I once spoke to a good friend of mine in marketing. I said, is really what's going on is that we're being subdivided into smaller and smaller groups so that companies can market aggressively to us and make us join their tribe so they can force feed us the stuff they want to sell us. And he turned around and said, yes, Paul, you've got it in one. How do you know? I went, that's so interesting, mate. Anyway, moving on. Health is wealth.
Yes.
So you're known for your real profound interest in health. So give us your top 3 health hacks.
Oh, I say that as here I am coughing away and sniffly. Oh my goodness. So yeah, I'm known for my health. Yeah, it's be consistent, do something every single day, no matter what it is. Do not go to bed until you've done your 10 minutes of yoga, or even just every single day. That would be my top one. And then my other one, my second one would be eradicate whole food groups from your diet. If you just tell yourself you do not do them, you do not eat them. So for me, it's I do not have cheese in the house. And that way, I never have cheese in the house. And guess what? I never eat cheese, except if I'm out, because I never have it. The same with alcohol. I've got a rule, I never drink on my own. And so for me, even if there is a bottle of wine there, I'm not tempted to open it because I never drink on my own. And that's what I think. If you've got really set, rigid rules that you adhere to all the time, then you're not going to bounce off against those. And then I think the final thing is that just get things done as early as possible in the day when your choice levels are high, your energy levels are high, and you're less likely to find excuses. Don't even switch on your laptop until you've done your yoga, done your run, done whatever it is. So yeah, I guess they're the top 3. But as I say that, I'm coughing away with
Well, forgive me
this
for that.
cold.
Like
But yes,
it is November, you're allowed to get the seasonal cold like everybody's doing. I think it's great advice, and you also touch upon a great theme there, which is like knowing your biorhythm as well. You are obviously aware of your biorhythm, so you get on with your day. You front load your day with your well-being, which is obviously like fantastic advice. And you're clearly not a fan of ultra processed food. You're a whole food woman. So again, this is all sensible advice. So Nicole, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. If these people have resonated with what you've said, what's the best way of connecting them to your future work, basically?
yeah, you can follow me on Instagram at nsbremner or on my website, nicolebremner.com.
Bremner.com. Perfect. Obviously, I'm going to put that in the show notes. All that remains for me to say to you, Nicole, is thank you so much for today. It's been absolutely fascinating, as I knew it would be, and what a story of resilience. So yeah, heartfelt thanks for coming on and sharing your story with us today, Nicole.
Thank you very much, Paul. I really appreciate it. I'm glad we got it done.
Yeah, definitely. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Property Investor Podcast. Discuss anything in this podcast. Click on the link below. Join me at the next Property Investor Breakfast. The next one is in January. You're more than welcome to join me. We'll be talking about goals and things like that. Other than that, please like, share, subscribe, share the podcast, get Nicole's story out there. Thank you very much for listening to the podcast. Keep well and speak soon.